I want you to imagine the greatest moment of your entire life. Imagine after years of sweat and struggle, you've finally made it to the place you've always dreamed of. Now, imagine that moment surrounded by 17,000 people, outraged and appalled by you. And this isn't right. You're meant to be their hero. They're meant to be cheering for you, but they're not. Instead, they scream how you shouldn't be here. You do not deserve this. You have ruined the thing they love. As much as it might sound like I'm describing the comment section of one of my YouTube videos, this actually happened in real life to a real person on the night of January 25th, 2015, to a man named Joe Anawai, also known as Roman Reigns. And I'm kind of obsessed with this night, not only because it is perhaps the most catastrophic disaster in the history of pro wrestling storytelling, but because it's a moment when you can see the fictional reality of pro wrestling separate from the actual reality experienced by its audience. And that right there, that is why I love pro wrestling. The story we're going to talk about today being maybe my favorite example of this. It's a story where this disastrous night is just one small part. A story that started over 10 years ago and is still ongoing to this day. A story that I love so much that I will talk about it at parties till my friends start to back away from me and refuse to look me in the eye. And maybe that's you. Maybe you look at the length of this video and think, wow, that is an utterly clownish amount of time for an adult to spend talking about pro wrestling. You've got me there, but you are kind of who I'm making this video for. See, wrestling can be, well, an absolute fucking shit show, but it can also create stories that are so genuine and human, ones that punch through the artifice of any fictional reality and become real. And my goal here today is to make you, the non-wrestling fan, see that. But first, okay, this story starts over 10 years ago and a little setup is required. At any point, a wrestling promotion is going to be attempting to build its next top star, the face of the company around whom all major storylines can be built, who can sell millions in merch and penetrate the mainstream, creating new wrestling fans. Because without that top star who is over with the audience, wrestling promotions can see a disastrous drop in revenue. And that fear is going to play a huge part in our story. See, this was a period when WWE's current face of the promotion, John Cena, had been on top for nearly 10 years. Cena now feeling the pull of Hollywood, meaning WWE needed to find its next megastar, and it needed it now. Two potential options being the men Cena would face this night. One being CM Punk, a former indie wrestler beloved by hardcore fans for his ability to make wrestling feel real, but to WWE management, perhaps a little too real. The other being Ryback, a man with a physique resembling two shaved bears wrestling for dominance, which appealed greatly to the real-life WWE owner and legitimate fucking crazy person, Vince McMahon, whose oddly obsessive yet bizarrely platonic love of man muscle meant that a lot of people were now speculating that this would be the night where a decisive Ryback victory would see him crowned as the next face of the company. And that is not what happened. As the match enters its closing moments and a Ryback victory starts to feel inevitable, three completely unknown men entered the ring and, like a swarm of black hornets, engulfed Ryback. And there was something so powerful about this image, this giant of a man being devoured by this cloud of darkness as they ripped the match apart, decimating Ryback. This was the first introduction of the Shield. Three brand new wrestlers, their names Seth Rollins, Dean Ambrose, and Roman Reigns. For the next month, this pattern would repeat as regularly scheduled matches would be hijacked and destroyed by the Shield. It didn't matter who you were or what you did. If you were an employee of the WWE, you were part of the problem the Shield was here to dismantle. And it was exciting. When the Shield's music hit, you knew you were about to see something real and violent. And you gotta understand, this was during the PG era, in which a child-friendly WWE would feature cartoonish characters like Santino Marella, a man who would win matches by transforming his arm into a sentient snake and paralyzing people. But now, it felt like that cartoonish world was being invaded by three very real, very dangerous men, and everything about the Shield's presentation enhanced that feeling. Their promos were shot on staticky handheld cameras. They came to the ring in combat gear and steel-toed boots. They didn't have a big, elaborate fireworks-filled entrance. They just emerged from the crowd like a group of silent killers. And suddenly, it would feel like the pageantry of the PG era was coming to an end under a hail of black-clad fists and feet, and it was fucking badass. But maybe the most striking thing about the Shield was the intensity of those attacks. An intensity that would be explained years later in Dean Ambrose's autobiography, Mox. The first night at Survivor Series, our mission was to destroy Ryback. Punk had put it in our ear that people might be in Ryback's ear telling him not to sell for us. Just a note here, if someone doesn't sell for you in wrestling, it means they make it look like your offense doesn't hurt, which can make you look weak. As would be our philosophy in these cases going forward, there's three of us and one of him. We beat the fuck out of Ryback. We were pros and we never hurt anybody, but there was a lot of busted lips, black eyes, and bruises. The Shield were like a lightning strike to WWE, but it still didn't prepare anyone for what would happen in their first match, which would come 1 month after their debut at TLC 2012, in which they now face the combination of Ryback, Kane, and Daniel Bryan. Real name, Bryan Danielson. Wrestling is very silly. No one really knew what to expect from this match because Kane, Bryan, and Ryback were all good guys and popular ones, characters that WWE had put a lot of time and money into building up, whereas the Shield were newcomers and bad guys at that. Traditional wrestling storytelling dictating that this would be the night where they'd receive a much-deserved ass-whooping and slide back down the mid-card. But what played out felt less like a traditional wrestling match and more like gang violence. Individually, you could take any member of Ryback, Kane, and Bryan, and in storyline, they'd nearly certainly defeat any single member of the Shield. But the Shield didn't fight as individuals. They were a unit, swarming and devouring their bigger, more experienced opponents. The good guys might get the best of one member of the Shield, hell, maybe two, but that's when they'd be blindsided by a third, dragged to the ground and obliterated in a hail of boots and fists. Despite there being the same numbers on both sides, Ryback, Kane, and Bryan felt constantly overwhelmed and disorganized, whereas the Shield were an efficient, violent machine. working in perfect unison, even sacrificing their own bodies for the greater good of their team. When the bell finally sounded, audiences sat stunned as the Shield stood victorious. The message was clear. Individually, these men were dangerous. As a faction, they were unstoppable. As the Shield continued to build momentum, the personalities of each individual member became more pronounced. Apart from being a technical genius in the ring, Seth was the architect, the cerebral tactician who would coordinate his Shield brothers from the sidelines, using them to create openings through which he would strike with a pinpoint brutality. Dean Ambrose was nearly the total opposite, an uncontrollable wild man who lacked the technicality of Seth or the athleticism of Roman, but made up for it with sheer violent passion, adept at both receiving and dealing massive amounts of punishment. But maybe even more critically, Dean was also the group's mouthpiece. His mic work had this captivating, laid-back tension to it that meant watching him deliver a Shield promo felt like talking to a cool stranger at a bar who might just be thinking about beating the shit out of you. Then there was the silent intensity of Roman Reigns. Roman had this quiet charisma that meant he didn't need to do or say a lot to be captivating, but he was. With a massive body yet freakish athleticism, any tag to Roman was the most exciting moment of a Shield match, as he'd bulldoze through enemies, saving near defeats and clenching close victories. Any one of these men would have been compelling by themselves, but together, there was something more. The Shield didn't just feel like the bad guys of someone else's story. They were three people to whom being a member of the Shield really seemed to mean something. Unlike other groups in wrestling, no one ever joined or left the Shield. That doesn't count! And despite being bad guys, there were times you could see them show real care and affection towards each other. You could see it in the moments when one member of the Shield would do something awesome and the other two would look genuinely ecstatic. You could see it in how they'd celebrate each other's victories with a real gleeful delight. You could see it in the genuine care and concern they'd show each other after especially brutal matches, helping support their fallen brothers and carry them backstage. And it all made it feel like there was something real at the core of this story of these three men alone in the hostile and competitive landscape of WWE. Three men who believed in, trusted, and relied on only each other. And I think the reason that connection felt so real is because it was. One of the most difficult things to convey to non-wrestling fans about wrestling is how competitive it really is. Yeah, matches are predetermined, but what isn't is the ongoing battle for TV time. In professional wrestling, the most limited, valuable, and sought-after commodity there is TV time, as it's time on television that allows wrestlers to get over with the audience, to sell merch, to build storylines, which leads to high-paying pay-per-view matches. Any wrestler getting a decent amount of TV time invariably means dozens of wrestlers who are not, and very quickly, clicks, locker room politics, and resentments can form, leading to bullying, harassment, and vicious hazing. That is the very real, very hostile environment Colby Lopez, Jonathan Good, and Joe Anoa'i entered in WWE. Or, to quote another extract from Dean's autobiography, Seth told me another story once about some guys who obviously didn't like him, trying to get him to drink with them. Not in a friendly, dude, let's have a beer way, but in a, hey, we think you're cocky, so we're going to get you to do a bunch of shots to prove you're one of the boys, bully way. Seth's not a drinker. My fucking blood boiled. That's my boy. This kind of shit brought us together. In storyline, the Shield were these three outsiders whose success, whose fate, relied on each other. But in reality, they were the exact same. Three outsiders trying to break into the hostile landscape of WWE, whose careers, whose livelihood, whose real ability to provide for their families depended on each other, their combined capacity to make this concept of the Shield work, and they'd spend nearly all their time together. As three young broke wrestlers, the Shield would, in order to save money, ride from town to town together, whiling away the dozens of hours of car travel in each other's company, the roadside diners, the pit stops, everything, even splitting cheap two-person hotel rooms, Roma and Seth taking the beds, Dean sleeping on the floor.
I don't even know what I'd do in my life without you. Guess what? You are so sweet, and I love you so much, and you are a great father. You keep talking to me like this, I'm gonna take you to dinner and I'm paying. You will not leave the tip.
You don't go through all that without forming a real connection with someone. And it was that real connection that resonated with people, to the point that even years later, after Dean had left the company, he'd get this kind of reaction from performing Seth's curb stomp finisher. The real life connection of these three men. That's what made it easy to believe in the Shield. And oh boy, did the internet run with it. Hello, and welcome to a very special episode of What the Internet Did to The Shield. See, not only were The Shield wildly successful in WWE, but outside it. In fact, entire fan communities were built around shipping the different members of The Shield. Rollins and Reigns were Rawlanes, Ambrose and Reigns were Ambrains, and Ambrose and Rollins, by far the most popular pairing of the three, were Ambrawlanes. And oh boy, let me tell you, some of that fan fiction. After a bad breakup, Seth Rollins leaves the Midwest to lifeguard for an aquatics facility in Orlando and restart his life. After everything he's been through, does he have what it takes to dive into love again? You might be asking, what is the point of bringing this up? To which I would respond, well, what's the fucking point in anything? But I do think it genuinely shows two things. One, the Shield are doing something only the most successful acts in wrestling do. Reaching new audiences you wouldn't traditionally associate with pro wrestling. In this case, to overgeneralize a little bit, young women who were into fan fiction. And two, I think it's also evidence that the reason the Shield were resonating with people wasn't just because they were three badass dudes, but because of the real connection between them. The emotional connection, not the shipping part. The Shield were that feeling of you and an invincible group of friends against the world. And honestly, it was kind of beautiful. It was a really cool thing to believe in. But that investment came with attention. Also, I changed into my new Eye Patch Wolves shirt because it just arrived and I love it. Also, WWE will 99% take all my money from this video. So if you are enjoying it and want to support me, you can do so at the Patreon and also the blah blah blah. Thank you. Factions in wrestling are built to fall apart, and what if that same fate awaited the Shield? Dean was getting too unhinged, too careless, costing his Shield brothers singles victories and abandoning the teamwork that had brought them this far. Him and Roman now clashing over who the most dominant member of the Shield was, with Seth growing exhausted from having to constantly keep peace. And unfortunately for the Shield, they were about to meet another three-person faction whose bond was both stronger and more insidious. The Wyatt family, a group of massive deranged back forest cultists, led by the eponymous Bray Wyatt. If the Shield were a lightning strike, the Wyatt family were more like some terrible miasma descending on the WWE and choking the life out of it. The two groups building steady momentum until eventually all that was left to face was each other, taking place at 2014's Elimination Chamber. There was a fucking magic in the air to this moment. The match getting This Is Awesome chants before the bell even rang. And it was. The Shield were what they had always been, a trifecta of people operating in near perfect unison. But the Wyatts were something more. They were one. with Eric Rowan and the late great Luke Harper operating as the massive mauling tentacles of Bray Wyatt. Silent and unthinking, the three together forming a single frightening consciousness, one able to do what no other team had: separate and consume the Shield, with Ambrose being taken out early in the match, leaving Rollins and Reigns exposed and vulnerable. It's a fascinating match, rich with a subtle psychology and in-ring storytelling that is so captivating, but it showed something. The Shield weren't invincible. Hit just the right spot and cracks began to appear. Slowly, those cracks spiderwebbed outwards. But despite everything, the Shield were still a team. They were still brothers and were now wrestling main event pay-per-view matches and gaining victories over the biggest stars of the company. While they had their issues, you could still believe in the Shield. There was nothing they couldn't survive as long as they stayed together. Let's talk about Seth for a second. Seth was an amazing technical wrestler and the glue that held the Shield together, but he was neither as charismatic as Dean nor as big and impressive as Roman, and terrified of being left behind as his brothers grew more and more popular, Seth Rollins destroys everything they'd built together for the last 3 years, and the Shield implodes. And just listen to how the audience reacts here. Not with outrage, but with heartbreak.
Oh my God!
In storyline, this was a tragic end to the Shield, but in reality, this was the conclusion of a 3-year-long narrative that had been told and paid off to perfection. And if you don't know much about wrestling, you might be asking, how could that be? WWE had just imploded their hottest acts. But the reason they did was simple. See, remember WWE's problem of needing to find a next top face of the company? Well, 3 years later, that had not happened. John Cena was spending less and less time wrestling, this very year acting in 4 separate movies, including The Flintstones and WWE, Stone Age SmackDown. There was no reason for me to be specific about that one, but I was. CM Punk had this very same month been fired from the company for, oh, we'll just leave it at being bold, and Ryback had all the success of a wrestler whose gimmick was I guess eating people. So with the implosion of the Shield, WWE had now 3 white-hot single stars who could now be positioned to become the face of the company. The only question being who. It was never going to be Seth. Dude just has heel written into his DNA, and if you don't believe me, follow him on Twitter. Dean was, to hardcore fans, the right choice. Killer in the ring, believable on the mic. But I think to WWE management, his corners were just a little too jagged to put on the front of a lunchbox, which left only Roman Reigns. Big, cool, devastatingly handsome, and with a Superman punch that could knock the stars out of the sky. Now, he did kind of shit-talk John Cena once in an interview, but it doesn't matter. That won't have horrifying ramifications later on. Roman even winning the Slammy for Best Newcomer, and so the choice was obvious. Roman Reigns would be the new face of the company, and what could possibly go wrong? And the answer is, oh my fucking god. Initially, Roman seemed a good choice. Roman Reigns chants were common, and people loved him as the big cool guy from the Shield. But what that meant was that Roman Reigns was a proven success in the Shield. But outside it, that was a different question. And this was not a question either Dean or Seth had to worry about. Both had lengthy and successful indie singles careers prior to WWE, experience and personas they could now draw on, but Roman did not, because wrestling hadn't been Roman's first choice. He'd actually been an American football player up until 2008, at which point he was released by the Edmonton Eskimos, only beginning training with the WWE in 2010, meaning by the time the Shield debuted, Roman Reigns had only been wrestling for about 2 years. You could hide that inexperience within the Shield. It was easy to build their promos, build their matches around protecting Roman's weaknesses. But now, those protections were gone. Attack to Roman Reigns genuinely was the most exciting part to any Shield match, but in the same way that an explosion is the most exciting part to a movie. It was cool to see, but you wouldn't want to watch an entire film of them. And if you immediately just thought, well, I would. No, you wouldn't! You goddamn liar! That's how Roman Reigns matches felt. He was good at running fast and hitting hard, but it was in the moments between those bombastic high spots that Roman's inexperience really started to show. He struggled with a lot of the subtler parts of wrestling, like maintaining a believable psychology or crafting a narrative through a match, and particularly in areas that involved acting, like selling, the art of making your opponent's offense look like it hurts, which when done right, can make you feel like this. Oh my god, did I just watch a man die? Is he okay? Roman, on the other hand, to try and disguise these weaknesses, WWE would frequently pair Roman with far more experienced wrestlers like Randy Orton, who would work their asses off to carry Roman to some good matches. But fans saw this as just another way of WWE protecting Roman Reigns, or as Uproxx's Brandon Stroud would write, Randy Orton wrestles a broomstick. Orton versus Reigns could have been Orton versus Mama's Boy from the pizza roll contest and been the same thing. What it all meant was that Roman's matches just weren't that interesting, never telling a story more complicated or compelling than Roman Reigns is a cool guy who wins a lot, and win a lot he did. Over 90% of his matches. He would demolish entire 5-person teams by himself. He would break the record for Royal Rumble eliminations and would only lose when the bad guy cheated. And if you were a kid, this all probably made Roman Reigns seem really cool, and it was designed to. But if you were a seasoned wrestling fan, this was all starting to look eye-wateringly similar to the PG-friendly John Cena wins LOL era. And what really did not help was this interview from CM Punk, released after he left the company.
It's me versus the Shield 3-on-1. This is the most pushed 3 guys. They've pushed and protected all 3 guys. And then they stress, and they grab me and they stress. But you gotta make Roman look really, really strong. So while we're putting the match together, every 2 minutes, somebody new is coming up to me. Hey, you gotta make him look really strong.
Slowly, Roman Reigns began to feel less like we were being told a story and more like we were being sold a product. And unfortunately for both Roman and the WWE, he had a much greater weakness than his matches, one that would not be so easily hidden. There's 2 ways to convey a believable persona in pro wrestling. One is in the ring, and the other is on the mic. And what you say doesn't have to be much or logical or combine words and sentences in a way any human would ever do.
Because this freaking nature right here is just beginning to swell. And when I get big enough, brother, there ain't gonna be room for anybody else but me and all the warriors floating through the veins and the power of the warrior.
What it is about is inhabiting a character and projecting that character outwards with an authenticity and confidence that lets the audience believe it.
Because, Sandman, when you chose to cross my path, you chose a living hell. Because you've awoken the sleeping giant, made me ashamed of the man I've become. And I guarantee and I make you a vow right now that I'm not gonna be that man anymore.
Roman Reigns, on the other hand,
Once he's done with Owens, it's best friends fighting for the very top of WWE. WWE Championship, JoJo.
Roman delivered his promos with all the confidence of a 7-year-old asking for more peas 4 seconds after shitting himself.
And when I win the WWE World Heavyweight Championship, I take my rightful place at the head of the table. And I'm here right now to be the first man to declare at the Royal Rumble match.
He'd flub his lines, he'd lose his place. He was given about 8 different stock catchphrases, all of which were equally vapid and conveyed nothing about him, such as "my yard, I can, I will," and most infamously, "believe that." Which, look, I know it's not quite the same as what Naruto says. I'm still gonna do the joke. Roman was actually pretty okay at growling out a few low, ominous words at the end of a Shield promo. But without Dean to lead him there, or the experience or skill to carry a promo by himself, that cool mystique he had in the Shield would just fall apart in ways that were sometimes just dull and sometimes genuinely disastrous to Roman's momentum and credibility.
My so-called brother here, he's got donkey dung for brains. Actually, you're full of something else. You are a sniveling little suck-up sellout full of suffering succotash, son. Yeah, I know, that was not easy to say.
It's so bad. It's just so bad, and I keep trying to write something to convey how bad it makes me feel, and suffering, suck it. What was that? I don't want to go too hard here because this is maybe the most shit on wrestling promo in history, but the fucking wink at the end, Roman, buddy, what are you doing? Originally, when I planned this section, I wanted to dissect why Roman's inexperience in matches, his lack of skill on the mic, all resulted in him not working as a singles performer. But the more I thought about it, the more I started to realize that there was something more. There was this kind of emptiness to both Roman's matches and his mic work. And what I think it really comes down to is just art. If art's going to resonate, it needs to be forged from some genuine sense of human emotion or experience that people can connect to. And it doesn't matter if it's the Mona Lisa or an episode of Smiling Friends. Good art comes from taking an authentic part of ourselves and fashioning something out of it. And bad art is not that. It's not honest. Instead, it's usually a surface level imitation of something else without an understanding of the human core that made that original piece of art special. Roman Reigns at this point was bad art, a corporately created John Cena bootleg with no identity or soul of his own, and you could see that in how he was now being presented. Still making the same Shield crowd entrance to the same Shield theme music, wearing the same Shield SWAT gear. And the only thing it communicated about this man was that he used to be in the Shield. And there was real stuff WWE could have drawn on from Reigns' personal life. He really was from a long line of great Samoan wrestlers. His cousins Jimmy and Jey Uso were a successful tag team whom Roman had grown up alongside and shared a real bond with. But this was barely acknowledged in story. Instead, the man of Joe Anoa'i was plastered over with this fake cartoon superhero Roman Reigns, there being no connection between the two. While at the heart of the Shield was their bond with each other, at the heart of Roman Reigns was nothing. And that emptiness, that's what you could feel in his matches. That's what you could feel in his promos. And soon, the audience started to feel it as well. But before we get there, I think it's worth asking, what does the opposite of this look like? What does it look like when a singles wrestling persona is carved from something sincere, human, and real. In 2002, wrestler Rami Sebel was booked as an enhancement talent for a promotion called Internet Wrestling Scene. Enhancement talent, which often go by their slightly less politically correct name, jobbers, are wrestlers tasked with, well, getting the piss kicked out of them to make other wrestlers look strong. But this was a problem for Sebel. He didn't want his current gimmick, Stevie McFly, to lose credibility. How Stevie McFly ever had credibility to begin with, I don't know. So instead, he donned a mask and wrestled under the pseudonym of Generic Luchador. However, over the course of the match, something started to happen. The crowd started to get behind the Generic Luchador, and as they did, a persona started to emerge. This young underdog wrestler who would regularly get his head punched out through his ass, but would keep going. And over time, the Generic Luchador would become beloved by fans, changing his name to El Generico. With a natural, ultra-likable charisma and ability to wrestle his fucking ass off, watching Generico perform was seeing someone who just really loved the art of wrestling. There was an electricity to Generico's matches. He didn't win a lot or even often, but it didn't matter. Fans adored him, becoming massively popular in Ring of Honor, where he'd meet his lifelong best friend and soulmate, Kevin Steen. The two together sharing their pure love of wrestling and even capturing the ROH tag titles, with a connection that felt real again because it was. The two men being best men at each other's wedding in real life. They were inseparable. I mean, come on, you've seen me do these videos enough now. You knew where that was going. Kevin saw in Generico that part of himself he hated most. Weakness. Was he really going to spend the rest of his life letting his good-natured love of wrestling trap him in smoke-filled bingo halls performing in front of crowds of 50? No, he had to be more. Generico was a cancer he needed to cut out of himself, starting a lengthy war between the two that was kind of tragic, the audience's heart breaking over and over and over again for Generico, who was barely able to bring himself to hurt his former friends, until finally Steen drove him to that place, Generico becoming Ring of Honor's last hope against the maniacal and dominant champion Steen had become. The day came when the two bitter rivals faced each other one final time. But it wasn't a match. See, at this point, Generico had been signed by a much larger wrestling promotion, meaning their rivalry, their friendship, everything that happened between them was at an end. And just listen to how Kevin phrases this in his promo.
Wherever you end up, wherever you're going, whatever happens to you, please know, I would be nothing without you. Thank you.
What I love about this moment is whether you view it as the end of two enemies whose hatred for each other pushed them both to greater heights, or just two real-life best friends saying goodbye, not knowing if they'll ever be able to wrestle again, it works perfectly. It's real either way. When I talk about the unreality of wrestling, this is the kind of moments it can create. That right there is what it feels like when a wrestler organically gets over with an audience, when they perform from a real emotional place and the audience connects with that. But by 2015, this was not what was happening with Roman Reigns. Every week, Roman's weaknesses were becoming a little more obvious. Every week, those crowd reactions would grow a little more tepid. And every week, a steady underchorus of boos would make its way more and more into the opening notes of Roman's theme music. Signs like Roman Reigns likes Nickelback saying more about how he was now being received by the crowd than I could ever fit into a single paragraph. And what was happening here was more interesting and bizarre than just a wrestler failing to get over. It was the fictional reality of WWE separating from the experienced reality of its audience. In storyline, Roman was this big, cool, invincible superhero. That's how he was presented in his matches, that's how he was talked about on commentary. But in reality, a very different narrative was starting to form. That Roman Reigns as the face of the company was not working, that he was being rejected by the audience that WWE had chosen wrong, and it was hard not to agree with that. Dean Ambrose was now embracing his pre-WWE John Moxley persona and getting white-hot, organic crowd reactions. And Seth was killing it as a conniving heel, even winning the Money in the Bank ladder match, which would allow him to cash in a briefcase for a WWE title shot at any time, even during other matches. I wonder, will that become relevant? WWE needed to get momentum back behind Roman Reigns, which would bring us to one night. A night that would see the constructed reality of WWE's story and the actual reality experienced by its audience rip apart completely. January 25th, 2015, the Royal Rumble. The Royal Rumble is an annual match where 30 wrestlers enter the ring at timed intervals and are eliminated by being tossed over the top rope, the winner of which goes on to fight the champion in the main event of WrestleMania, meaning the Royal Rumble is in theory the most fun night of the wrestling calendar. Adored by fans for its absolutely wild storytelling and potential to crown new stars in a single night, which Roman needed, but WWE management hadn't considered two things. One was the steady but building fan backlash against Roman, and the other was Daniel Bryan. Take everything I said about El Generico and multiply it by a factor of, well, probably one, honestly, an ultra-likable, battle-hardened indie wrestling gnome who could bring you to tears with the emotion and passion he brought to every match. Bryan was so beloved by fans that WWE was forced to change the main event of the previous year's WrestleMania because of how passionately the audience had gotten behind Bryan, only for Bryan to then tragically have to drop the title and step away from wrestling due to a career-threatening neck injury which put him out of action for 9 months. This match right here to be his glorious comeback, a fairy tale ending for a beloved crowd darling. Wait, no, what are you doing? WWE, no, don't do this, no! Yeah. The crowd goes numb and then apoplectic, turning on every other wrestler in the match, and when Roman's music hits just 10 minutes later, you could hear the piss boiling throughout the arena. The combination of having their beloved underdog rejected in place of what they now saw as an artificial, corporately appointed champion, the crowd is brought to their frothing, quivering limit. A reaction that would haunt Roman for the entire rest of the match. It didn't matter who he eliminated or what he did. The cries of the audience were absolutely corrosive.
Big Show spot, he wants to earn his own. He wants to do it tonight at the Look! Big Show, I think he was trying.
To the point that when he topples his final opponent over the top rope in a deeply predictable Reigns wins lol fashion, boos melt the arena.
Rock coming to the aid of Roman Reigns.
17,000 furious cries crashing down on Roman Reigns, and you can see the shock in his eyes, as the crowd's reaction punches down through the fictional persona and into the actual person of Joe Anoa'i. A man expecting the greatest moment of his life and then colliding with the most monumental rejection the industry had ever seen. Even an appearance by Reigns' cousin The Rock cannot quell the rage of the audience, and just look at the expression on The Rock's face. Kind of says it all, really. But regardless, the path was charted. Roman Reigns was going to be the main event of WrestleMania, and the crowd fucking hated it. March 29th, 2015. The main event of WrestleMania. Roman Reigns enters to a chorus of ghostly wails that follow and hound him to the ring. To everyone watching, Roman Reigns' victory was a certainty given how he'd been pushed and protected to get here. One small caveat being the man he was facing, the beast incarnate, Brock Lesnar, the most believable, legitimate champion WWE has ever seen. Terrifying in ring, but outside it, he had his advocate, Paul Heyman, one of the most compelling talkers in the entire industry. Pairing the right manager with the right talent can give them the final 10% that pushes them into greatness. I mean, take someone like Simon Miller. A great wrestler, beloved by fans, but can you imagine if someone could give Simon that last 10%? If someone could bring out the killer in him so that people actually saw him as more than just a novelty YouTube act? Wouldn't that be something? Oh, I'm sorry, I've gotten a little lost here, haven't I? Across from the combination of Lesnar and Heyman, Roman felt less legitimate, less believable than he ever had, and the idea that this was going to be the guy to dethrone the beast, well, that was not a reality anyone wanted to accept, and you could hear that from the audience.
Roman Reigns!
In fairness, I actually love this match, and Roman is great in it. If you watched it on mute, you could experience this kind of awesome and tragic underdog story as this valiant young hero battles upward against the hopeless inevitability of Brock Lesnar. But sound on, and you get a very different story. Any slight moments of hope or offense from Roman collide with a chorus of overwhelming boos. The near 100,000 people in attendance bursting into gleeful delight each time Roman is slammed to the mat. And it is surreal, like watching some bizarre alternate reality where the monster is cheered and the underdog hated. But this was not the only strange thing that would happen tonight. As the match entered its closing moments, Seth Rollins' music hit and he cashes in his Money in the Bank briefcase, pinning Roman and stealing the WWE Championship in the heist of the century. And in story, this was a fucking incredible moment, but in reality, there's one very curious detail about it. According to Seth, he was only told this was happening this same day, just a couple of hours prior, after his own WrestleMania singles match, which he lost. And this could have been to keep the swerve a secret, or a sign of WWE slamming the brakes on Roman Reigns at the last minute, having lost faith in him for the overwhelmingly negative crowd reactions he was now receiving. Regardless, if the plan had been to crown Reigns the next face of the company, it had gone disastrously. And unfortunately for Roman, this was just the beginning. Things had gone poorly, but it didn't change the fact that WWE still needed a face of the company, and having poured millions into marketing, into TV time, into development of Roman Reigns, they were not going to give up on their investment. And so WWE in the following year started trying to change the narrative. What if Roman Reigns hadn't been successful, not because the fans didn't want him, but because the evil WWE management had schemed to keep Roman down? A storyline that involved him feuding with the ultimate wrestling bad guy, Triple H, who was both in storyline and in reality the CEO of the company. And honestly, this story failed for the same reason that Suffer and Succotash Roman had failed. It was a hollow imitation without any genuine core, this time attempting to emulate the anti-authority appeal of Stone Cold Steve Austin in the Attitude Era. But it could never work. To so many fans, Roman was still this artificial, corporately appointed hero, selected not because he was a great wrestler, but because his mainstream marketability was so high. And so attempts to now frame that corporate hero as an underdog battling that same corporation, it was a story as insincere as it was comical. Triple H would brutalize Roman in attacks that felt designed to draw sympathy, but instead the crowd would just howl in delight. After nearly an entire year, the two met in the main event of that year's WrestleMania, in which WWE did everything they could to make Triple H look like the ultimate authoritarian villain, including entering with a giant skeleton clone army of himself. It didn't matter. This match was fucking painful. Rejected by the crowd from the opening bell, the audience's frustration crippling its momentum over 30 agonizing minutes.
Second row. Roman Reigns caught him on the right.
A match that dragged itself over the finish line with a limp yet inevitable Roman Reigns victory, and the crowd despised it. WWE had done everything they could to bring Roman to this point, but unfortunately, Roman's momentum would stall yet again, as per the Pro Wrestling Torch, a wellness policy violation would see Roman punished with dropping the title and being suspended for 30 days. WWE would spend the next year desperately trying to re-legitimize Roman in the eyes of the audience, including bestowing upon him the ultimate honor in pro wrestling. Roman Reigns would be the one to retire The Undertaker, the most respected, worshipped wrestler in the industry with an incredible 30-year legacy that you can learn about in this video. But what should have been this monumental overcoming of this immortal entity at that year's WrestleMania kind of wasn't. You could see the years of wear in the now 50-year-old Undertaker, the match's slow, plodding pace punctuated by botches and mistimings, and when Reigns finally beat Taker, it just feels kind of sad, and God did fans hate him for it. That hatred following him all the way to next year's WrestleMania, in which he main evented with Brock Lesnar again. And my God, the sheer vitriol from the crowd for this entire match. Having now endured their 4th Roman Reigns WrestleMania main event, they turn absolutely nuclear. They chant for CM Punk, who at this point had been out of the company for years. They scream, "You both suck," and it features maybe the only "this is awful" chant I've ever heard.
Oh my God. And now Lesnar delivering the straight right-handed blows. You can
2 years later, footage was released from backstage after this match, and you can see the absolute disgust on Brock Lesnar's face as he hurls the title belt at Vince McMahon and walks out of the company. And I have to say, when I watch back footage from this era, I genuinely feel like I'm watching a man trapped in a nightmare. There's a kind of haunted look in the eyes of Roman Reigns for a lot of his entrances. This faraway glaze, like he can't even believe what's happening. He can't believe that people hate him this much. And that hatred, it only grew more corrosive and specific. All it would take is the camera to linger on Roman for just a couple of seconds at any random WWE event and the crowd would turn absolutely toxic. And there were times when you could really see that hatred get to Roman.
And right next to that championship is a huge chip on my shoulder from people telling me I can't. People like these guys right here.
Roman even had to stop making his trademark entrance through the crowd because of security concerns. And in one house show, a fan even hurled a metal briefcase that struck Roman in the back of the head. And the sad part was, Roman was legitimately improving all the time, developing a wider moveset, showing a greater understanding of the storytelling and psychology that a good match takes. But it never seemed to matter. After a legitimately excellent match with AJ Styles at Extreme Rules 2016, Roman's victory was met with a single freezing chant: "You still suck."
Sit out powerbomb. Yeah, the impact from that and from that backdrop through this.
Roman was a man haunted, trapped between the fictional reality of playing a hero and the actual reality of enduring the hatred of hundreds of thousands of people. And unfortunately for Roman, there was a single night where one person would obliterate the divide between those two realities. And his name was John Cena. John Cena, in a lot of ways, had been through many of the same things Roman had. A young star pushed to the moon by WWE only to receive massive fan backlash. And maybe that was a part of what was about to happen. Maybe Cena saw in Roman the same ghost that had haunted his entire career. I don't know. But what I do know is that Cena was about to commit one of the most brutal maulings in the history of pro wrestling. But it wasn't going to happen in a match, it was going to be on the microphone.
You are the high exalted Roman Reigns. Look, everybody back there knows it. Everybody out here still kind of trying to figure it out. Because when they look at you, they see what I see. A cheap-ass, corporately created John Cena bootleg.
Cena comes at Roman with a genuine fury that leaves Roman visibly shaken. You can hear his voice quiver as he struggles to retort, and then it happens. Roman, in front of the entire world, chokes.
They boo you because first of all, you suck. And second of all,
Go ahead, find it. Go ahead. Oh, wait. It's called a promo, kid. If you want to be the big dog, you're going to have to learn how to do it.
Roman, now genuinely furious, lashes back at Cena, attacking the fact that Cena was now a part-timer and the pattern of him beating and delegitimizing younger talents.
you're a phony. You're a yes man who can learn how to do anything or be anything.
It was actually the first legitimately good piece of mic work Roman had ever done, but Cena, 10 years more experienced, volleys back and in doing so completely decimates Roman.
Congratulations. It took you 5 years to got a halfway decent promo. I blame you. I'm still here because you can't do your job. You should be ashamed I'm a part-timer, because I can do this part-time better than you could ever do it full-time.
Roman was a hero that no one wanted, and all Cena did here was drag that truth out into the blazing daylight. By 2018, Roman felt more hated, more rejected than he ever had. And I gotta say, knowing how much a single bad day on the internet can fuck me up, I don't know how a person goes out night after night, week after week, and endures this kind of disdain from tens of thousands of people. By all accounts, Roman Joe was a decent, hardworking guy. He was liked backstage and known to have treated everyone from the ring crew to his fellow performers with respect. And even then, was it really his fault all this was happening, or was it the fault of the people who put him in this position? Unfortunately, the answer didn't matter. At this point, Roman Reigns was maybe the most genuinely hated wrestler WWE had ever seen. Something had to give. And it did. Just not in a way anyone was expecting. October 22nd, 2018, Monday Night Raw. It's been nearly 4 years since that fateful night of the Royal Rumble. The show opens with Roman Reigns walking to the ring to what is at this point a completely inevitable wall of boos. But something's off. His steps are slow and heavy. There's no posing, no playing to the crowd. And when he enters the ring, there's just this pause. That silence immediately filled with the vitriolic jeers of the crowd. Then he speaks.
I feel like I owe everybody an apology. I've come out here and spoke as Roman Reigns, and I said a lot of things. That I'd be here every single week. That's all lies. It's a lie because the reality is my real name is Joe. And I've been living with leukemia for 11 years. And unfortunately, it's back. And because the leukemia is back, I cannot fulfill my role, and I'm gonna have to relinquish the Universal Championship. And it didn't matter if you cheered me. It didn't matter if you booed me. Thank you so much.
Expressions of disbelief and heartbreak blanket the audience. Roman leaves his world title in ring and walks back up the entrance ramp, where he's met by his brothers in the Shield, real tears in their eyes, as a new chant slowly starts to break out in the audience. Thank you, Roman. It's a bewildering, devastating moment, one that I think Michael Cole puts exceptionally well. We come out here Monday nights to entertain. We live in this alternate reality sometimes, and I think we all forget that we're real people, that the superstars in the locker room are real people, and reality came up and bit us here tonight. If you had spent the last 4 years hating Roman, whether it was booing him in person or talking shit online, this moment forced you to reconcile with the very uncomfortable truth that at the other end of that was a real person. And honestly, I was one of those people on Twitter, on podcasts, and if I'm going to be real, using Roman, using Joe as an outlet for whatever was going on in my own life. I guess in a way, this video is my apology for that. And so, Roman Reigns disappeared from WWE television, his future unclear. There is a much sadder version of this story that ends here. However, this is not that story. 2 years later, the world would find itself in the grip of the pandemic, meaning that the WWE now took place in the nightmarishly dystopian Thunderdome. Having his return ruined by an increased risk of COVID, Roman Reigns hasn't been seen on television for months, with WWE actively seeming like they're trying to avoid mentioning him. The main event tonight instead is occupied by Bray Wyatt, The Fiend, which, Jesus Christ, is its own ridiculously long video essay that I will probably never make, looking to settle his long-standing rivalry with the monstrous Braun Strowman. And just as the match enters its closing moments, Roman Reigns returns. But something is different. The way he speaks, the way he attacks his opponents, he feels violent and dangerous, leaving Wyatt and Strowman in a broken, crumpled pile. 1 month later, Roman Reigns has allied himself with his new special counsel, Paul Heyman, and together, the two have snatched back the WWE title without ever even competing in a full match. And now, his first contender is his own cousin, Jey Uso. The build to the match is strange, but compelling. On one side, you have Roman Reigns, no one knowing if he's a face or a heel or what's going on with him. But on the other is Jey, and Jey is delighted. See, he spent his entire career as a tag team wrestler with his identical twin, Jimmy. But this match was his opportunity to show the world that he was a legitimate star onto himself. And even more so because he gets to do it with his own cousin, this person he grew up with, this person he shared his life with. But Roman is cold. Distant. In one section, Jey hugs his cousin, delighted that they've both made it through their entire lives to this level together. And when Jey walks away, Roman makes this face. Oh, sweet mother of Jesus, I thought. Roman is going to murder Jey, and there it was. For the first time, I found myself excited to see a Roman Reigns main event. September 27th, 2020, Jey Uso versus Roman Reigns. Jey enters the ring, and it's hard not to root for him. After a decade-long career, this is his first singles title match, and he's excited. But then Roman's music hits, and he emerges, and holy shit, I don't know what's changed in Roman. Maybe it was his battle with leukemia, maybe it was the months of isolation from the pandemic. But what I knew in this moment is that there was something different about Roman. Something deep inside Joe Anoa'i had shifted, and where there was nothing before, there was now something. Because whatever it was filtering down through every tiny part of him. The way he moved, the look in his eyes, even his appearance had changed, having grown out his beard and packing on what looked like about 20 pounds of solid muscle. And this was all before the match even started. Roman brutalized Jey, demolishing his cousin in a way that felt so violent and frightening. But the parts of the match that stood out to me the most wasn't even the instances of the sheer brutal physicality, but the moments in between, in which Roman would stalk Jey, berating his cousin, asking, "Why are you making me do this? I love you, but you can't handle this responsibility. Don't make me do this." Something inside Roman had shifted, and out of it had crawled something unhinged and terrifying. Finally, Jey's twin brother Jimmy, horrified by what was now happening to his brother, throws in the towel. A month later, Jey would face Roman again, but this time in an I Quit match, meaning that if Jey was going to lose, it was going to be by his own choice. Jey again fights valiantly. This is his last chance to fulfill his dreams. But it's impossible. He cannot compete with the overwhelming force that is Roman Reigns. As the match slows to an agonizing crawl, Reigns doing increasingly heinous things in order not only to make his cousin give up on his dreams, but to acknowledge him as the head of their family, growing more deranged and violent with each passing second, until finally, with Jey unable to end the match under his own power, Jimmy pleads with Roman to stop doing this. He begs Roman to remember their entire life together, that whatever you're going through, we can fix this. You don't need to do this. We're your family. I love you. And you can see the pain in Roman's face as Jimmy's words slowly reach him. And the years of rejection, the years of pain flood out of him. Is this who he really is? Is this what he's going to let himself become? And as the past washes over him, finally, Roman Reigns reaches out and takes his cousin's hand, saved by the love of his family. Roman chokes the life out of Jimmy as Jay, barely conscious, watches in horror, and he gives up, acknowledging Roman as the head of their bloodline, and the tribal chief is born. The message was clear. If this is what Roman was willing to do to his own family, can you imagine what he would do to anyone else? And so the question now is, what was it? What was the emotional core of the tribal chief character? And I think there's one particular moment that answers that really beautifully. The main event of WrestleMania 38. This was the first time a wrestling show had taken place in front of a live crowd since the beginning of the pandemic, and that would prove vital. See, this new version of Roman Reigns had never performed in front of a live audience. And a big part of this new tribal chief persona is that he does all these awful things, but he does them in his own mind for other people, for his family, for his bloodline, for all of us, because no one else can bear the weight and responsibility of being the face of the company. That's the lie he uses to justify his own actions. In Roman's own mind, he is our hero, taking on the responsibilities no one else could. But then there's just this moment where in the main event against Edge and Daniel Bryan, Roman takes a second to collect himself. And as he does, the audience begin to once again boo him. And look at the expression on Roman's face. After everything he's been through, after the years of rejection and hate, after beating leukemia, after the isolation of the pandemic, after everything he's done for us, we still boo him. We refuse to acknowledge him. And that right there was now the core of the Roman Reigns character. And I want to break down just how fucking incredible a piece of metafiction that is. For years, the in-universe fictional storyline in WWE is that Roman Reigns was a big, cool hero that everyone loved. However, the reality became that Roman Reigns was pushed by a giant corporate entity who saw him as a way to sell merchandise and appeal to the mainstream, who then was violently rejected by the fans he was meant to appeal to. And what's so incredible about this moment is that we now see that reality folded back into the fictional storyline. Because Roman Reigns' greatest opponent isn't Daniel Bryan, it isn't Brock Lesnar, it isn't John Cena, it's us. It's the audience. It's the people who plunged him into a 4-year-long nightmare. The ones who ripped at him, the ones who tore him down during the greatest moments of his life. All that pain, all that anger, all that humiliation, that is what was now his core. We can believe Roman Reigns, the tribal chief, because we created him. And that right there is the unreality of pro wrestling, where story becomes reality and reality becomes story. Week after week, the tribal chief character would continue to evolve, justifying his own actions, saying that he did these awful things because his family, because wrestling could not survive without him. This was the lie he told himself as well as Jimmy and Jay, telling them that this was all for them, for their family, for their wives and children, manipulating his cousins back onto his side and forming a brand new faction, the Bloodline, later joined by Solo Sikoa, the Usos' terrifying younger brother, who literally kills people with his thumb, who Roman would use to enforce his maniacal dominance. If the bond of the Shield was three men who believed in each other, the bond of the Bloodline was the absolute cult-like devotion to Roman Reigns. And everyone involved played their part in this beautifully. Heyman as this nearly priest-like figure worshipping and adoring Roman. The Usos as these innocent but brainwashed devotees, but particularly Roman himself, whose character work had improved so dramatically, and you could see this in the moments where he'd be so kind, so gentle, just wanting what's best for his cousins and their family. A facade that would shatter the instant someone displeased him, and Roman would turn so cruel, so frightening.
The tribal chief said he wants peace. I don't give a damn what the tribal chief said.
This was the power Roman forged the Bloodline in, and his presentation now reflected that beautifully. His new entrance music, Head of the Table, ushering Roman to the ring with all the spectacle, bombast, and dominance of a Dark Souls DLC boss fight. And when that entrance music hit and you watch the entire Bloodline emerge in full force, it was like watching a group of demons march out of hell, and it was fucking awesome. Together, the Bloodline ripped a hole through WWE, the Usos capturing both tag titles, and Roman Reigns becoming the unified, undisputed World Heavyweight Champion in an unprecedented for the modern era 1,000 days. In the process, laying waste to all his old demons, Daniel Bryan, Brock Lesnar, even John Cena. But critically, it was in those matches you could feel something at the heart of Roman Reigns where there had been nothing before. A trauma, a fear that was bubbling just below the surface. You could see it when he faced his old Shield partner Seth Rollins, and Seth makes his entrance through the crowd in his old Shield ring attire to their old Shield entrance music, in a just exquisite piece of psychological warfare designed to remind Roman of what he used to be. You could see it in the Clash at the Castle, where a UK crowd is so rampantly white hot in favour of their hometown hero Drew McIntyre, and how having that size of a crowd so audibly against him seemed to gnaw at and damage Roman more than it ever should, bringing him back to the days when he was the most hated man in wrestling. But it was in those moments Roman was able to fall back on his bloodline, his protection against us. All his canned stocked catchphrases replaced with a single defining command aimed at us, the audience.
Acknowledge me! Acknowledge me! Acknowledge me!
He was cheered, he was booed, but now it was specifically all by design. A king driven mad by his kingdom, exerting a crushing maniacal dominance over his world. That is what Roman Reigns, the tribal chief, had now become. At this point, Roman had become the kind of megastar who is now breathing the rarefied air of your Stone Cold Steve Austins, your The Rocks, your John Cenas, and how incredible is that? After everything we've watched this man go through, all the failure, all the rejection, and then to use that to get to this, that is some real ass motherfucking art right there. Because sometimes you pour your soul into a project. Sometimes you try everything you can to make it work, and it doesn't. It gets rejected. It gets ignored. You fail, and that's fucking hard. But what this entire story says to me is maybe that failure is going to be the growth you need to make the next thing work. And I don't want to sound like any more of a lunatic than I undoubtedly already do, but I find that a deeply inspirational statement on the nature of creating art. But to try and yank this video back on track, as for what it actually says about the medium of pro wrestling, to get there, there's one more piece of this we now need to fold back into the story. Remember El Generico? Well, the reason Generico had to make that emotional goodbye to his friend and nemesis Kevin Steen is that Generico had been signed by NXT, WWE's developmental division, where he would drop the luchador mask and El Generico character and took on the name Sami Zayn. At least I think it's the same person. I'm like 70% sure it is. Zayn, still with all the electricity and charm that made El Generico so popular, was beloved both by NXT audiences and his fellow wrestlers. I mean, just look at the locker room empty out when he finally became the NXT champion, which all meant big things for when he was finally called up to the main WWE roster. Or at least it should have. Being a fan of indie or Japanese wrestling and watching your favorites get called up to WWE is painful. See, remember how we talked about Vince's love of muscle? Wrestlers without that body type tend to have a very difficult time getting opportunities from WWE management. It doesn't matter if you can put on 5-star matches, it doesn't matter if the audience would commit war crimes in your name. Without a bodybuilder physique, so many of the most talented wrestlers in the world have watched their careers ebb away in a flurry of poor booking decisions. And unfortunately, this is what happened to Sami Zayn. Weeks would go by without Sami even being featured on television, and when he did, he usually lost. In fact, in 2019, he lost 15 out of his 16 matches, even being relegated to the role of a manager. WWE eventually turning this ultra-likable, natural babyface into a comedy heel character. Kicking off 2022 by competing in a match with Johnny Knoxville, which he lost by being snared in a giant mouse trap. And to be clear, I actually kind of fucking love this match. Like, Sami is amazing in whatever he does, but if you remember the glory days of El Generico, it was hard not to feel a kind of tragedy in all of this. But then, something started to happen. Sami Zayn began to appear in Bloodline segments. Initially, this was intended as a short-term comedy storyline. Sami as this ridiculous Bloodline fanboy trying so hard to be accepted into what was now the most dominant faction in WWE. Him even wearing Bloodline merch, which was just so hilarious and pathetic. I wrote that line before remembering that I own a pair of Roman Reigns socks. And it was so silly and ridiculous and entertaining, but then something starts to happen. Sami's plan begins to work. Sami first befriending Jimmy, who just really seems to get a kick out of Sami, the two even forming a goddamn incredible secret handshake together. And then Solo, whose stoic demeanor would crack under Sami's endless barrage of positivity. The only holdout being Jay, who despised Sami, seeing him as this outsider, as this person trying to usurp his position as Roman's right hand. And the looks of disgust and hatred Jay would shoot Sami in these segments were just fantastic, as Sami became closer and closer to the tribal chief. And these interactions really humanized Roman. It was kind of heartwarming watching this little golden retriever of a man befriend what was now the maniacal god emperor of pro wrestling. And what really made it work was the genuine chemistry the two seemed to share. You could see the moments where Sami would try and make Roman laugh and how much they enjoyed performing together, and the result was some of the most entertaining television WWE had ever produced.
I just want to say, I know I'm not technically blood,
right? But the way you guys have taken me in as a family, I wanted to show my gratitude. Also, publicly acknowledge the tribal chief.
I like you, Sami. But what are you talking for right now? Why do you have our shirt on? What's going on here, man? I want you to take that shirt off.
I don't know if you're kidding or if you're not kidding. Just don't make any rash decisions.
I'm not going to tell you again. Jay. I don't want to see you in that shirt ever again. Do you understand me? You ain't ever going to wear a Bloodline shirt ever again. You ain't ever going to wear it again because I got you a new one.
This segment shows something else, however. See, I think what made Sami in the Bloodline so captivating was because there was this kind of unease to it. For as fun as these sections were, we all knew what Roman Reigns was. We'd witnessed the things he could do, and knowing all that violence, all that madness was bubbling just a few feet away from Sami. It was like one of those videos of a mouse befriending a tiger. It was cute, but we all knew exactly what could go wrong. For months, Sami fought to earn the respect of the Bloodline with the promise that he would one day be welcomed into the family. And again, it was hard not to feel a kind of reality in that. Sami had really struggled in his time in WWE for 7 years at this point, and the idea that the Bloodline was a place where he could be seen, a place where he could belong, that was real. And so when he finally proved himself, even winning over Jay, it felt monumental. Sami now on the verge of his new name, Sami Uso. But there was one small problem. The Bloodline would make their grand entrance, Sami in tow, but slowly the cheers from the audience grew more focused and specific. And they weren't chanting for the Usos or Solo or even Roman. They were chanting for Sami. Week after week, those chants got louder. Week after week, Roman would listen as the same audience who had rejected him, who had denied him, who had driven him to the brink of madness, now gave that love freely to Sami. Roman turning distant, cold, and cruel. One second he'd go off on Sami, screaming at him, accusing him of being a traitor, of trying to usurp the head of the table.
Do you want to be the tribal chief? Do you think you're me? Do you think you're me? Do you think you're me?
And the next, he'd draw him back in, apologizing, saying he needs to be a better leader, trapping Sami just as he had the rest of his family in a manipulative, toxic relationship. At one point, Roman even put Sami on trial, which I'm not going to give you the blow-by-blow of because Jesus Christ, this video is too long, but it's on YouTube and you should watch it because it is some of the most ridiculously compelling television I have watched in years. And oh my god, when Sami's found guilty and Solo was about to hit him with the Samoan spike, but then it's Jay who saves him, he's like, I love you, Sami. I love you because you believed in me even when I didn't believe in you. It's so good. It's so good. Slowly, this story began to feel like a mob movie. You'd tune in every week wondering, was this gonna be the day that the Bloodline were gonna turn on Sami, until finally, the night of the Royal Rumble of this year, in which Roman Reigns defends his Universal Undisputed Championship against Sami's old friend and nemesis, Kevin Steen, now going by Kevin Owens. Roman wins the match decisively with the help of the Bloodline, but it's not enough. This man has committed the crime of standing against the tribal chief. Adequate punishment must be delivered. Owens is handcuffed to the ropes and a volley of super kicks is launched into his skull. It's brutal until finally Roman, steel chair in hand, approaches Owens, and just as he's about to strike, Sami steps in, the lifetime of memories the two share together now flooding back. Sami pleads with Roman. He begs him, saying he doesn't need to do this, that this is beneath the tribal chief. And Roman agrees. Sami, caught between his past and his present, is paralyzed. He cannot hurt his old friends, and Roman berates him, insulting him, slamming his palm into Sami's face until finally, Sami has no choice. He does the only thing he can do. One small detail that really chills me about this moment is that it's Jimmy who attacks Sami first. Jimmy, the first person that welcomed Sami into the Bloodline, the two having spent months laughing and joking together, doing their dumb little handshake. There's something so cruel about how all that just disappears in an instant. Like Roman's madness and violence has now seeped into everyone around him, turning them just as empty and dangerous as he is. The Bloodline decimates Sami in one of the most frightening attacks I've ever seen on WWE television. The only one who doesn't is Jay, horrified by what his family have become. And at the center of it all stands Roman Reigns, as a brand new crowd chant now rains down upon him. Fuck you, Roman. It is a chilling, haunting moment of television, but it's also something more than that. It is a piece of storytelling that could only happen in wrestling. I remember I got this comment years ago on my Undertaker video about how I was giving WWE too much credit for The Undertaker's entire 30-year story and how they could have never planned it all out from the beginning like that. And I really think that person misses the point. It's the fact that these stories aren't planned, it's the fact that these stories can't be written that make them special. What wrestling is a long-term form of narrative fiction that grows and changes with its audience in real time. And you can see that here, where the audience can build a star like Sami Zayn out of real passion and love, or create a villain like Roman Reigns out of real rejection and hate, and then combine those two very real stories into fiction, creating moments like this one in a way that is so beautiful and captivating and devastating. Wrestling's really silly. It is a big, ridiculous muscle pantomime, often controlled by nightmarish billionaires who refuse to go away. But when it's done right, it can be so real and raw. Stories that can't be controlled, predicted, or planned. Ones that overlap with real life in a way that is both fiction and reality. And that is the unreality of pro wrestling. And it fucking rules. Friends, thank you for watching today, and a special thank you if you're not a wrestling fan. I hope this showed you how cool wrestling can actually be. Check out eyepatchwolves.com for the new eyepatchwolves merch, as well as patreon.com/super_eyepatchwolf to support the channel and get a 15% discount on merch. Special thank you this week to Fudge Waffle, No Name in Credits, Ellie, Half Rotten Egg, Tina Mina, Sweaty Egg, and Snafu Bravado. Friends, take care of yourselves, and I'll see you next time.